Thank you, Enactus. Your check is in the mail. I'm Jim Kucher, and I'm here to tell you that capitalism is not a bad thing. I do, however, think we kind of screwed it up in the past couple of years. But before I get started, I got to do something. I just want to acknowledge the woman with the tiara. What? Talk to me. What's the tiara about? It's your birthday. What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? Haley? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Haley. Happy birthday to you. You have now been embarrassed on the internet. Congratulations. All right. Most of you know who this guy is, right? Yes? Hello? Okay, thank you. This is a participatory sport. So, regardless of how you may feel about the election, one of the really interesting things that Bernie Sanders did was he really brought to the forefront a feeling that a lot of people have that there is something wrong with capitalism. The interesting thing is this is not an American phenomenon. This is not isolated to our country nor to our political system. This is Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is a British member of Parliament. He was involved actively in the Brexit activities. He, like Bernie Sanders, describes himself as a socialist Democrat. This guy is Yanis Varoufakis. He was a member of the Greek Parliament for about a year and a half. He was actually the finance minister in Greece. And he describes himself as a libertarian Marxist. These are just three quick examples of folks around the globe that are really having conversations about whether or not the inherent fundamental process of capitalism is wrong. Many of them talking about returning to socialism, some other things. Margaret Thatcher said that the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. Some other crazy guy said that in order to redistribute wealth, which is the core fundamental thought of socialism, you first have to create wealth. Wealth does not come out of the clouds. It must be created. Or in the words of that great historical, well-known philosopher, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. There is no doubt that there is huge concern in our society that people are actively being hurt, that there is a lot of pain in our society and around the globe about flaws in the economic system. Most of you remember the 2007-2008 financial crisis. We are still recovering from that, most economists would say. Some of you may remember Occupy Wall Street. A couple dozen crazies in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan turned into 951 cities in 82 countries. In a month, it went from 5 people in a tent in Zuccotti Park to 951 cities in 82 countries. That says something's up here, and it's global. My man, Pope Francis, 2014, no to an economy of exclusion, no to the idolatry of money, no to a financial system which rules rather than serves. Something must have happened. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, Chicago School of Economics, 1970 editorial in the New York Times, said the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Okay, that's nice. And yes, running a business and making money and earning income is a good way to contribute to society. You do provide jobs, you do increase the welfare of the economy, that's all a good thing. Friedman has become misquoted over the years, and what we've come to interpret Friedman's work to actually say is that the sole purpose of a corporation is to maximize its return to shareholders, and from there it's a very quick jump to seeing things like clear-cutting a forest, and using a stream as a way to deposit your industrial waste. That what we should do is anytime we have a company, we should stand on the gas pedal as hard as we can, make it as big as we can, and to hell with anybody else that gets in our way. That thought actually came out of an earlier thought. Garrett Hardin, also a Nobel Prize-winning economist, published something called The Theory of the Commons, the tragedy of the commons, that says, essentially, this is his sort of academic way of saying it, but I'll break it down for you into real basic words. Basically, what he said is that human beings, left to their own devices, will do whatever they can to maximize their own position, even if it means hurting other people. In other words, the collective economy doesn't work because we're too competitive and we just try to beat each other up all the time. That's what Hardin said. That's where Friedman's thoughts came from. Those are the fundamental tenets of what we know now as the American capitalist system. That's not what it was built to be. Adam Smith, one of the founding thinkers in capitalism, was actually designing a system that was intended to free people from the tyranny of feudalism. Let me break that down for you real quick. Feudalism is the lord of the manor, and everybody else in the manor is essentially a slave. Smith said, well, you know what? If we could start to have divisions of labor and start to build businesses, maybe we could free that. Henry Ford was not trying to build a global automotive empire. Henry Ford was actually trying to build an employment engine, not a huge global conglomerate. He was actually trying to build something that could simply provide steady employment and a good wage for his people. I love this woman. This woman is Elinor Ostrom. Elinor Ostrom is very interesting for a couple of reasons. Elinor Ostrom is the only woman to ever win the Nobel Prize in economics. Elinor Ostrom is actually not an economist. She's a political scientist. What she won the Nobel Prize for was disproving the theory of commons, that the tragedy of the commons doesn't actually happen, that people can actually overcome that tendency to want to compete with each other and work together. And what she used to prove that was lobster fishing in Maine. Lobster fishing in Maine was so bad and so competitive that the lobstermen were on their boats with shotguns. And they would go in and cut each other's lobster trap cords just to get rid of the other competitor and keep the lobster fishery to themselves. They finally realized that this was crazy, this was unsustainable. They got together and they divided up the lobster fishery along the Maine coast into zones, and each lobster fisherman is assigned a zone and an area, and they fish that. This has been so successful that the lobster fishery in Maine has completely come back. Last summer, when my wife and I were in Maine, we were buying lobster off the boat for $1.25 a pound. That's how well this has come back, because people said, wait a minute, we don't have to do this. We can work together to make this a better place. Thank you, Elinor. Traditionally, we've used charity to try to solve these kinds of social problems. You can't walkathon your way out of this problem. A walkathon gets you quarters, not dollars, and not hundreds of dollars. And you can't go to a foundation to get it, because the way the tax system is set up right now, charitable foundations are only required to give away 5% of their assets. Math majors in the room will very quickly realize that means they hold on to 95% of it. That's not using money to make the world a better place. In addition to that, there are all sorts of issues around the nonprofit behavior complex. You're essentially begging for money, which is never a good thing in terms of human dignity. You have a very hard time telling it works. No donor wants to pay for operations, day-to-day work. They all want to pay for the next big shiny object, but they don't want to pay for the next big thing. Too many of them are around trying to keep their organizations intact rather than making the world a better place. And then the last one, which a friend of mine coined the phrase, the white savior industrial complex, which basically says, we're going to parachute into your neighborhood, and we know better, and we're going to deliver social change for you, as opposed to coming in with humility and saying, how can we help? Well, what about government? Maybe government can fix the problem. Anybody got enough sense of history to recognize who that guy is in the bottom in the middle? It's Rod Blagojevich, former governor of Illinois, currently serving time in a federal penitentiary for trying to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat when he was elected president. Just next door to him is Mark Sanford, former governor of South Carolina, who disappeared from his office one day. They couldn't find him for about a week. When he showed up, he said he'd been out hiking on the Appalachian Trail. He was in Brazil with his mistress. He's actually been reelected as a senator now. Fascinating story. That building on the top is the the Watergate complex, for those of you that are history majors. Clearly, letting government act in their own devices isn't going to solve this problem. Well, what if we just share it all? Well, Tiananmen Square and some other experiments have proven that that doesn't really work well. If you read the last chapters of Animal Farm, you'll find that it just ends ugly. Historically, we have relied, hello, how did we die? There we go. Historically, we've relied on our neighbors, our friends, our social systems, our faith structures. That's great. But what about the people that don't have those networks? What about the people that are disenfranchised in some way? What about the people that don't fit in to one of those boxes? Well, let's get back to capitalism for a second. I said at the beginning of my conversation that I was here to say that capitalism is a good thing. What the capitalist system has done is allowed us to develop a process of innovation, a speed of innovation, a rate of change and technological improvement in efficiency, communications, logistics, unparalleled in the history of the planet. And because of that, people have gotten very wealthy. I don't think this is wrong. I think this is a good thing. I think the problem is what we did with the money. Does anybody really need a 135-foot mega yacht? Couldn't you get along with 125? I think I could adjust. It might be a little cramped, but I think I could adjust to 125 feet. I don't know. Maybe not. What if we use that money, just a little bit of it? I'm not saying people shouldn't get rich from their efforts or get paid for their efforts. All I'm saying is, what if we use some of that money, instead of making that 135-foot mega yacht, to make the world a better place, to feed somebody, to grow something? I've had a chance to talk to Aaron Hurst. I've met him. I've read his book. He coined the phrase, the purpose economy. There's a lot of other labels out there, social enterprise, social entrepreneurship. I like this purpose economy phrase because it really clarifies what we're trying to do here. We're still trying to have a productive economy, but we're trying to shift the purpose. We're trying to shift the purpose away from making people ridiculously wealthy towards making people better. It's actually not a new concept. You are sitting in a social enterprise. You are sitting in a nonprofit that has an earned income strategy. Hospitals have been doing this for years. The difference is that any organization that's trying to do this is trying to create wealth on multiple levels. They're trying to behave in a manner that is pro-social, that they're trying to produce economic wealth. That's entrepreneurship. We're pretty clear on how to do that. That they're trying to produce social wealth, which has historically been the area for nonprofits, and they've been trying to produce communal wealth, which has historically been the area for government. These are three great local examples. Harbor City Services runs a moving and storage company staffed by people suffering with schizophrenia. They run it as a for-profit enterprise. He was in business for about 20 years before he merged with a larger nonprofit, never took a dime of charitable money. The first time he took a grant, he was embarrassed and upset about having to take a charitable grant. Vehicles for Change is now in 4 cities. It started in a little auto shop in Baltimore, helping people develop independence in transportation. Local Color Flowers is doing phenomenal work in Charles Village, totally changing the floral industry, no carbon footprint. All the flowers they sell are grown within 100 miles of their store. They're gorgeous. They're priced competitively. All over the world, this is happening. You recognize some of these faces. You may not recognize some of the other ones. This is Theaster Gates, who's doing incredible work in Chicago, Muhammad Yunus, a bunch of other folks. This world is coming. The people that are going to make this happen are not me. I'm an old guy. I'm going to be gone in a few years. The people that are going to make this happen are you guys. And I'm counting on you. It's got a lot of names. Don't let the names bother you. Remember that the point of this is that you're trying to create civic wealth that comes out of all three of these buckets at the same time. It's not an easy trick, but it can be done. It is being done, and it has to be done if we're going to get out of the hole that we're in. You want to talk to me about it? Here's how to find me. Thanks for your time.